Thank you very much, Francois, Madam President, my very esteemed colleagues, and this very wonderful audience. And I just compliment you and thank you for your patience and your passion and your enthusiasm. And to all the families and friends of these mourned victims, not just of last week, but the weeks and years before, we offer our condolences and our prayers. There's a lot of confusion, at least from an American point of view, as to what our priorities are and what our focuses are in this very unique springtime of freedom as we watch all across the Maghreb and the Arabian Peninsula a committed, courageous, and extraordinary outburst of freedom and sacrifice. But I think in some confusion, there's a couple of very clear messages that we can send here today. The first message is to the residents of Camp Ashraf, the people in MEK that are leading the March to Freedom. Don't give up. The regime and we're conscious that they watch and listen to us as we speak here long into the afternoon. Your courage, your commitment, your incredible sacrifice is pushing the regime in Iran over the cliff. The regime is not acting through whatever surrogates it's managed to now compromise in the government of Iraq because it feels that it can get away with the obvious war crimes, the atrocity, and the murders that we've witnessed. We've witnessed them. We've seen them here today again. It's acting because it's desperate, because more than UNAM, more than the United States Armed Forces, more than NATO, they are most terrified about all of you in this room and the freedom that you represent. The second message is to the regime in Iran and its surrogates, some of whom we witnessed today, aiming and hunting and murderously cutting down unarmed civilians. What we say to you is that your regime is coming to an end and that you will be held responsible for the crimes, for the atrocities, and for the genocide which we are all witnessing today. And I hope that the government in Iraq, as one of my eloquent speakers earlier said, a government that's been born of the blood of hundreds of thousands of Americans, others, Iraqis, the hope is that government is not also on a quick path to becoming a corrupt regime. You know, we have photographs of the people who were committing these murders last week. And the message has to be that sooner or later, the corrupt regime will change, and its surrogates and aiders and abettors, whether they're in Iraq or in Washington, D.C., will be brought to justice. And that's the second clear message that we give tonight. And the third clear message we give to our own United States government, of which we're all very proud. And the message is that you have it wrong on the MEK, you have it wrong on Camp Ashraf, and you've got to live up to both your moral and your legal duty to protect the residents of Camp Ashraf. You know, I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I'm a policeman. I was trained as a police officer. I spent years as a prosecutor and years as a judge. And I can't tell you how infuriating it is to me to watch the people shooting those weapons, aiming them, carrying police shields, trained and equipped by the United States government, committing the acts that we witnessed here today. We were almost too late in Benghazi. And what's the difference between Benghazi and Camp Ashraf? The simple difference is that the United States and the world acted to protect the people in Benghazi, did not act to protect the people in Camp Ashraf. So let me be a lawyer for a few moments. There's a lot of legal law and there's a lot of criminal process and procedure that helps put into perspective some of the things that we've witnessed here today and what you are all committed to preventing. There is, first of all, the concept of conspiracy. People conspiring to commit criminal acts. There is a very powerful amount of evidence which shows that there is a conspiracy between the regime in Tehran and certain elements of the Maliki government who should be determined by an investigation, have agreed to murder and destroy the people in Camp Ashraf. That is a crime, ladies and gentlemen. It's a crime in New York City. It's a crime in the United States of America. It's a crime in The Hague and Geneva, and it was a crime in Nuremberg. Let me tell you about another legal theory. And the legal theory is called aiding and abetting, which in the United States of America and in the equivalent of most other countries is a criminal offense, a serious criminal offense. And that is allowing and facilitating crimes to take place with the intent that those crimes occur. In the defense of the United States, I do not believe for a moment that there was an intent to facilitate the atrocities and the war crimes that we've witnessed last week. I don't think there was a criminal intent, but by the inaction of the United States for a long period of time, since 1996, if you want to date the MEK listing on the Foreign Terrorist Organization list, by that inaction, there was an aiding and abetting of the murders and atrocities that took place. So I guess I take a somewhat different legal and perhaps moral position. I don't believe that the continuation of the MEK listing is inaction in itself. I think that the continued and unjustified listing of that organization on the FTO list is promoting and facilitating, regardless of any bad intent, conspiracies and murders and atrocities and war crimes, and will continue to do so. The principle of protecting the residents of Camp Ashraf is absolutely undisputed. There is no confusion about that. Under the 4th article of the Geneva Convention, all of these individuals are protected persons. They wear badges. You can see some of them on the film, which identifies them as United Nations protected persons. Beyond the conventions of the United Nations, the United States of America, as you heard from one of our colleagues, promised the safety of these residents when it handed over the jurisdiction and the authority to the Iraqi government. It has been proved beyond question that the Iraqi government is incapable, and an argument can be made, totally non-committed to the continued protection of these protected persons. In that case, the United Nations and even the United States, which has its promise on the record, has to intervene and take over that protection. There can be no excuse and no delay and no substitution for that moral imperative. You've heard several times today that the listing of the MEK organization on the FTO list is unjustified according to the facts and the law. I spent a lot of years as a judge, as a prosecutor, looking for facts, gathering facts, analyzing facts, presenting facts, and making decisions. There are no facts, there are no construable set of facts which justify listing this organization. And you've seen the principles, the human rights principles and the freedom principles of Mrs. Rajavi. There is no conceivable factual argument that this organization is a terrorist organization. And every day, every hour that this organization remains so incorrectly and unfairly listed, we are providing to the regime in Iran and its surrogates in Iraq a license to kill. The United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, which is respected as probably the most important appellate court next to the United States Supreme Court, looked at the classification, looked at the classified information that the State Department very inably and very ineptly presented to the court to justify the continuation of this FTO listing regarding the MEK. The court sent this matter back to the Secretary of State months ago, last July, and said, you haven't looked at the facts and your sources are not credible. For 8 months, whatever rocket scientists in Foggy Bottom are reviewing this, they still have it wrong. And there is no indication, publicly or otherwise, that this classification is corrupt. Just observe who's on the panel here. You've got ambassadors, you've got generals, you've got former FBI directors. They're not here today, but there's former attorney generals, there's former ambassadors, there's former directors of the CIA. Do you think any of us would be seriously involved in making this argument if we thought for a moment that this organization had any terrorist tendencies? The answer is absolutely not. They have the opportunity to correct this. And this is not a very difficult legal or factual decision to make. Number one, take the MEK off the Foreign Terrorist Organization list, Madam Secretary, and your husband's administration put it on. You can actually redeem him by taking some action. Secondly, you must protect the residents of Camp Ashraf. What you saw last week was a rehearsal. It was a warm-up, and it was a test to see what the reaction would be in the United States, in Geneva, in all the European capitals, indeed in all the capitals around the world, if public, satellited, with audio, murderous action was going to be tolerated or not. So it is imperative that action be taken. And in all the press releases out of Iran, in fact, the government of Iraq's press release talked about the justification of what happened last week precisely because this group is a quote-unquote terrorist group. So the United Nations, the United States, has to take over the protection of these residents. It has to do so immediately. And most importantly, and lastly, not only the government of the United States, but the governments of Europe, all of the forces of organized civilization and rule of law around the world have to support the wins for Iranian freedom, both in the MEK and inside the country. And that has to be done on a continuous and committed basis, or else we're going to have more tragedies to be talking about. Thank you very much.